Hello, Slick Talk fans. Welcome back to the show. This is Blackstone Joe. I'm back in the host chair for episode 44. This one's titled One for the Books. Before we get things rolling, I wanted to do something we haven't done in a while on this show, and that is offer up another faux sponsorship. If you've listened to most of our episodes, then you'll notice that I'll sprinkle in faux sponsorships here and there because we don't have any official sponsors, which is cool in that I don't have to make up any spiels about any products that aren't actually good, or I don't have to be hey, subscribe to Squarespace. I don't have to do that. It's just within my limits to talk about things I enjoy, spotlight things around the area. We're located in Fort Wayne, Indiana, so that's how I'm going to concentrate most of my faux sponsorships. Today, I want to give a shout out to Antonuccio's Italian Market, located in Fort Wayne, Indiana on South Wayne Avenue. I visited them for the first time fairly recently. Had a friend come over for dinner and they brought a meat and cheese tray over. So my wife and I really dug it, and it wasn't just your average charcuterie board that, also, I can't believe I just used that word on Motor Oil Podcast, but here we are. It's real life. This is what happened. So my wife and I went and paid them a visit. I'm good for the occasional Italian dish. I'm good for the occasional pesto or linguine or lasagna, so on and so forth. So I figured why not pay Antonuccio's a visit, not only for another phenomenal meat and cheese tray, but also because I wanted to see what kind of ingredients they have. They source the very best ingredients for any Italian dish you need. And it's just a really cool setup, located in a great neighborhood, and they're family owned and operated, all that good stuff. I'll definitely be a return patron, so shout out to Antonuccio's. It's a good spot. And we have a couple reminders. So first one, if you haven't listened to it yet, be sure to check out Grand Touring Motorsports Break Fix podcast. This one was released on July 19th, featuring yours truly. It was a great time joining Eric and Tanya on their show, talking all things motor oil. Some of it's going to be overlap with topics on this show, but some of it was also topics more specific to their wheelhouse, autocross, competitive racing of any form, just also getting into the ins and outs of motor oil, what choices go into maintenance plans. Basically, if you like our show at all, you're going to enjoy some of what we talk about in this show, if not the whole darn thing. We also had a bonus segment we did that you can access through their Patreon. That was particularly fun in that the questions that came up, what we talked about was just a lot of personal background information about myself, my interests, going beyond the nuts and bolts of used oil analysis. So again, check them out. It is Grand Touring Motorsports Break Fix podcast featuring Blackstone Joe. It was a good time. Check them out if you have an opportunity to do so. Check them out, give them a subscription, and if you like the episode, obviously a rating is always a big help, not just to them. We enjoy those too. And by the way, please take a screenshot of your review and tag us in it on social media, and I'm going to send some swag your way as a thank you. So don't forget to rate and review our show and let me know, and that way, once I know who you are, I'll be able to send something your way, be it a hat, shirt, something along those lines. So, we always appreciate the feedback. Keep it coming. Also on deck, we have another reminder here to check out our talk with Ultra 4 Jones. This was this past episode 43 of Slick Talk, so if you haven't yet, give that one a listen. It was maybe my favorite collaboration we've done so far on the Slick Talk platform. Ultra 4 Jones was just a blast to talk to. That's his Instagram handle as well, and he does a really good job of updating his stories constantly, letting you know what he's doing, the projects he's working on in his garage. You'll also have the opportunity to learn about Ultra 4, as I did during our talk, and yeah, Kevin's a good guy. Give him a follow and check out what he's up to, and with how well the talk went, I wouldn't be surprised if he turns into a recurring guest. All right, now on to the main event. So this episode was titled One for the books, because we're taking a look at records here. Rankings, numbers, things that would be in a book. The Blackstone book. This is a look behind the curtain, which is another one of the core values of the show, is that we want to let you know more about Blackstone, more about what we know. We can't let you know all of our secrets, but this is background that I think will surprise a lot of you. So without further ado, here are the 10 most sampled engines and systems in the Blackstone database. Now, and to kick things off at number 10, we have Continental's IO 550N. So, aircraft engines, we have a couple on this list, and definitely didn't surprise me to see IO 550 in the rankings. So I expected to see a couple of aircraft engines make the cut. We don't talk about aircraft engines as frequently as we do gas, diesel, automotive engines on this show, but that's certainly not because they are a minor aspect of our business. And right here, just to give you an example, Continental IO 550Ns account for 6,100 and give or take, because this number has probably even changed by maybe 50 to 100 samples since this recording, but just say roughly 6,100 samples from just the Continental IO 550N. So doesn't surprise me to see this engine in this ranking at all. With these bigger Continentals, something we'll tend to keep an eye on is exhaust valve guide wear. And just real briefly, I'll touch on that. In testing, that's generally going to show up as the metals nickel and chrome. Then you'll get maybe some iron too if a problem's going from bad to worse. We keep an eye on that, but also in general, we're looking for anything that would be concerning to an engine, be it contamination, excess fuel, water, see how the oil's holding up, etc. But yeah, we will keep an eye on things like exhaust valve guide wear. Some of these bigger Continentals can make a lot of metal, but in general, maintenance for these engines, as with any aircraft motor, is just so important when you're an aircraft owner that cares about keeping their engine in tip-top shape. Next up at number 9, we have BMW's S54 B32. This is a 3.2 liter inline 6. We have about 6,500 of these in the database, 6,500 samples. BMW owners, especially those with S54s, will always want to keep a close eye on bearing wear, I'd say, to the extent where I kind of just start a comment talking about bearing wear. I'll assume that it's something that they want to know about. So we'll keep an eye on that, but I would want to reiterate, though, just because it's a common concern doesn't mean that's a common problem. Often, I would say the only thing that kind of bums me out with reporting on these samples is we'll find a slight change, a slightly high level that's worth keeping an eye on, and what often occurs is folks will then be maybe a little preemptive and kind of want to change their bearings out just after like one less than ideal sample. And it's like, that wasn't my objective at all when I was telling you that, there was some extra bearing wear present in this sample that we wanted to monitor and see where it goes from here. But people will want to be very proactive with these engines and their bearings. So I understand. But we see them a lot with S54s, really any engine that can be associated with spirited use. Folks want to keep an eye on how the wear patterns look, see how those engines are responding to harder use, modifications, so on and so forth. But yeah, we were bound to have a BMW in the list, and S54 certainly makes sense. Next up, we have another aircraft motor, this one the Lycoming IO360 L2A, checking in at about 6,600 samples in our database. I might have guessed Continentals to be a bit higher, I don't know, but it doesn't surprise me to have at least one Lycoming present. IO360 L2As, they wear well, but still, even with engines that don't make much metal, you still want to look out for any worrisome change, especially, following an overhaul. You want to see how they're responding to different flight patterns, different operators, And if you have periods of inactivity, you want to see if corrosion is a problem. Obviously, this isn't just an IO360 thing, but really any aircraft engine that's doing some sitting, you want to see how they're handling it. All good reasons to use oil analysis. But yeah, Lycoming IO360 L2A is similar to the IO550Ns. It's an impressively large number of samples, especially considering we might well have even more where people just want to say IO360. So oil analysis is just so important for aircraft that it makes complete sense to see not one, but two aircraft engines in the rankings. Next up, we have Ford's 6.7 liter Power Stroke coming in just below 6,700 samples. 6.7 liter Power Stroke, there's not like a common problem or anything that people are trying to monitor, but these diesels are just so popular and they last long. Even so, people will want to see how they're responding to harder use, towing, hauling, see how a bypass filtration system is working, if it's keeping insolubles low for a long period of time. People want to check out additives like Arch Oil or Revex in big diesels like this. They want to see how that's responding to it. Not surprising, nor is the inclusion of Cummins ISB 5.9 liter. This accounts for about 7,200 samples in our database. ISB 5.9s, that's an engine that I came to know very quickly after starting with Blackstone because we see them so often. Their fans are very serious about these engines. They have a good reputation. Words like bulletproof are thrown around quite often. And yeah, similar to the 6.7, I don't have like, oh, here's a serious problem you have to monitor with that. It's just not that kind of motor. But still, you'll want to see how it's handling longer oil runs if that's your thing, how it's handling hauling. Really, there's a lot of overlap amongst every engine out there in terms of why oil analysis would be valuable, but end of the day, not surprising to see it this high. And the familiarity with this next engine also came about very quickly. That would be Subaru's EJ25. So these are the 2.5 liter four cylinders. We have about 8,800 EJ25 samples in the bank right now. Modifications are pretty common. Adding a turbo, adding a bigger turbo, seeing how the engines are responding to new parts, doing swaps, the whole nine. It tends to be within the ownership of folks who want to ask as much as they can out of it, and for good reason. Like I said, they're fun motors, and you want to see how the engine is handling all of the fun that it's asked to undertake. So EJ25s checking in at number 5. So number 4, we have another diesel. You'll notice a trend here. Diesel engines are very prevalent in the rankings here. So Isuzu's 6.6 liter Duramax. Now this would be the pre-2017 variety. So we're looking at about 9,300 6.6 liter Duramax samples. Again, not anything where there's a common issue people are trying to monitor. These engines can wear well, and they can wear well for a long time. But folks still work these engines because that's, it's what's made to do. It's not made to be a simple grocery getter. So naturally, people want to see how the engine is taking to the use it sees. People want to also often go with longer oil change intervals. The extended oil use box on the back of the slips, it's commonly checked with a, yes, I am interested in extended oil use. And people will want to test the limits. And I think it's not just because of the oil they buy, it's because of the engine and the reputation. They want to get as much as they can out of it. At number 3, we have another diesel. It's Navistar's 6.0 liter Power Stroke. This one we have 11,000, about 200 samples in the database. And 6.0s have a little bit more of an interesting evolution in that in the first couple years that they existed, fuel system issues were pretty common. So we would see a lot of fuel. We detect that with the flashpoint test. And so excess fuel was the narrative for a while with these motors. But importantly, it didn't last forever. It was really the first couple of years, and then these engines had a comeback in that area. Evidently, Navistar found out what was wrong, and then after a couple years of existing, we didn't see excess fuel nearly as often. Next up at number 2, we have something that I bet is a curveball for a lot of our listeners here. Deister vibrating screens. We have nearly 13,000 samples from Deister vibrating screens. So I would be surprised if there is like more than 10 listeners out there. Maybe I'm not giving you all enough credit that know exactly what I'm talking about here, because vibrating screens are very prevalent in our line of work, but not to, the owner of a car or truck who's sampling with us listening to the show. So here's a little bit about Deister. They specialize in vibrating equipment for the mining, quarrying, and allied industries. So vibrating screens, you'll see them at rock quarries, and these are systems that require very specific grades of oil, think like an ISO 320 gear lube. And it's important to look for the correct viscosity, to look for water, to look for debris, and obviously metal that could be from the bearing cages in these systems. So this is definitely in the industrial realm, and maintenance is just, it's important everywhere, but especially for these screens. To address a problem with these screens is not easy. It's not simple. It's important to make sure the oil is being changed in these systems. It's important to get ahead of problems before they turn into very expensive issues that could have been prevented just with more frequent maintenance. So if you have no idea before today what Deister is or what these vibrating screens do, they are really cool. You can check them out on YouTube and see them in action. They are massive and really neat systems, actually. We've seen a lot of samples, and that is just another instance where regular maintenance is so important, and oil analysis is really the only way to know with certainty that maintenance is being performed, that there is no potential issue with contamination, the oil oxidizing rapidly, poor wear, so on and so forth. And here we have the big kahuna. Number 1, Navistar's 7.3 Power Stroke, accounting for nearly 17,000 samples in the database. So being number 1 in the rankings here, this spot does not mean that the engine has any common issues we look for, nothing along those lines. It more so speaks to the fervent fandom of the 7.3. People really like these engines to the point where I'll just tell you a quick anecdote to kind of illustrate this. If you don't know, if you're not one of the 7.3 owners who, you've already been to the church of the 7.3, a family member of mine was out around town with a friend and saw that there was an excursion just parked outside someone's house, and I think might have had a for sale sign on it. This family member, the friend they were driving around, gets out of the car, goes up to the owner of the house. They had no interest in the excursion, but they knew that it had a 7.3. So they just went up to the owner of the house who was selling the excursion and said, "I don't want the excursion really, but I'll give you 10 grand right now for that engine." That is a illustration of how much people like these engines that first sight, not even really doing a whole lot of poking around, not really seeing much about it. They had that much trust in the 7.3 being worth the investment. These engines, it's just not uncommon to see them with a lot of mileage on them, still wearing well. You don't need to do a whole lot. People will try and even improve on the results that they're getting, which are fantastic. And often I'll find myself saying that these results are just tough to beat. It's hard to get metals much lower in a diesel. You really don't need anything other than quality oil and occasional monitoring of the engine, seeing how it's handling, the use it sees. If you want to do modifications, go ahead, but end of the day, if you come across the 7.3 in good shape, there's just not much more you need to do. And that's a benefit, is that the reports for these engines, they're just often quiet. There's not a whole lot to cover, which is a good thing. Engines that are easy to write about tend to be the more problematic ones, because I don't have to search for what I'm going to say. The problems stand out and they're very immediate. But not so with the 7.3. It's one of those engines where I'll just be scratching my head trying to come up with a spicy comment, something interesting that you didn't expect. Because to their credit, they wear well and they tend to wear well for a long time. So this was a fun deep dive into the Blackstone database. I'll do this in different ways with different topics. Might look into oils that we've seen the most of, might look into, like I mentioned earlier with certain engine models, seeing how problems have been solved over the years. Some engines that start off putting excess fuel in the oil and then the manufacturer figures it out and kind of illustrating the progress we see. But that's one of the core missions of the show, is to give you a look behind the curtain. That's what I wanted to do with this episode. So I'm excited that we were able to get it done for you guys. If there's any questions, comments you have about this list or other engines that you're curious about, don't hesitate to send them my way. If you have reached out recently about a collaboration, about different show topics, etc., I'm doing my best to respond to those and be as present as possible. This past week, we've just been so unbelievably busy. We are packed to the gills with samples. We are fully staffed. There's no shortage of workers. We just have all we can handle. And also this past week was Oshkosh, and listeners are not familiar with what Oshkosh is. It's the biggest air show in the world. It takes place in Wisconsin. We have a booth there. And by the way, thank you to everyone who stopped by that booth last week and said hello. We appreciate that, and especially the podcast fans. But yeah, as I was saying, if you've reached out and I haven't hollered back at you, it's mainly because we were so busy. Keep reaching out. I will get back to you as quickly as I can. Sometimes I just need a break, so keep that communication coming. We are so thankful for all the listeners supporting this show, so I'm excited about the progress we've made and the progress that's to come. So that brings episode 44 to a close. This is Blackstone Joe, signing off.